Hello, everybody. Wanted to let you all know that we will just be getting started here in just another moment, so please continue to hang tight. Thank you. Okay, hello again. Thank you all for joining us today. I did want to let everybody know that this webinar is recorded, and I've also turned on the closed captioning. And also, I do hear just already some background noise, so please, I wanted to ask everybody, please stay on mute, and we will have time for a question and answer session at the end. But yes, so the webinar is being recorded, and also the closed captioning is turned on for those who need that. And welcome to our second Bipartisan Infrastructure Law webinar. My name is Erica Cole, and I am a transportation planner and the transportation branch at Wausau Park Facility Management Division. And let's see. And we have a lot to cover today, starting with opening remarks by Jim Modello and Bob Radcliffe. Then there will be a BIL overview with information on why partnering is important to BIL opportunities and NPS transportation priorities. Next, there will be information shared on partnership strategies and resources, followed by an overview of integrated transportation planning with an example from Colorado. We have also had some successes with partnership grants, so we'll share a couple of those with you, along with lessons learned. And then towards the end, we'll review some additional resources that are available, followed by a question and answer period. So throughout the presentation, please go ahead and feel free to put your questions in the chat or hold them to the end where we will be covering those. The common element in these BIL opportunities is partnerships. So in that spirit, I'd like to introduce you to Jim Modello, manager of the Park Facility Management Division, and also Bob Radcliffe, division manager of the Conservation and the Conservation and Outdoor Recreation Program for opening remarks. And here on the screen, you'll see an excellent demonstration of partnership between the Secretary of the Department of Interior and the Secretary of Transportation. So over to you now, Jen.
Erica, hi everyone, thanks for. I'll keep this relatively short. Just glad we have a lot of folks here so we could help you understand what the opportunities are that exist in the bill. Really focused on partnerships and how we can use those partnerships to connect folks to our parks. Further our goals for equity and inclusion for visitors, as well as reduce congestion in parks. So it's going to be, I think, a great presentation with a lot of information, and we're here as resources if you need more. We'll have plenty of people that you could call and reach out to. But there is a component of this that really starts, in my mind, with planning and local community engagement to be able to really have this opportunity to get some of these grants where we cannot apply directly as the Park Service, but we could apply either jointly with partners, or we could partners can apply and we can offer our support. So there's a lot of money here that's been provided in the bipartisan infrastructure law that we can use to support our goals. Some old programs, some new programs. So we'll go through all that. Thank you all.
Thank you, Jen. Now over to you, Bob.
Oh, sure. Hey, everybody. Bob Ratcliffe, Chief of Conservation, Outdoor Recreation, National Park Service. And just as like Jen said, thanks for joining the webinar today. We hope it'll be informative, but we're always here to provide assistance and information moving forward, and more of that will be available as all of this unfolds. One thing I'd love to emphasize is that unlike our normal funding sources, we have to work collaboratively with partners across a pretty broad spectrum, and it varies from some of these grant fund program opportunities. And so, knowing the sort of ecosystem of partners out there, how and projects are eligible for funding and what the application processes and timelines are become critically important. We in the Partnerships and Civic Engagement Director, we really refer to the principles of OPM, and that's not Office of Personnel Management, that's other people's money. And so what we're trying to do here is leverage resources that benefit the parks in really big ways. And as Jen said, the level of investment here is unprecedented. And these funds will last for several years. So developing these partnerships and relationships now can pay off later. And that's really the focus of our conversations today in our presentation. Some of the things that I have you keep in mind is that it may not be the usual suspects that help us leverage these funds, as in transportation, state transportation departments, or local planning, or community planning, or city planning efforts, or transportation efforts. It may well be other partners like our own friends groups and or conservation interests, or others who can help advocate for funding for the projects once they get sort of compiled and proposed. So think in terms also of projects like wildlife crossings for highways, or recreation trail and access opportunities to communities that don't have access to our parks, as other partners to reach out to and collaborate with. So, in moving forward with these with this entire program, it does represent a huge amount of money and opportunity. We have been successful in the past in collaborating for Federal Lands Access Program funds, for Recreation Trail Program funds, and other sources. So consider us as assets and resources as you move forward with your proposals, and don't hesitate to reach out at any time. So thanks a lot. So back to you, Erica.
Thank you, Bob. And now I will hand over the mic to Steve Suter to kick us off here with an overview of the bipartisan infrastructure law. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. I'm Steve Suter. I'm the Alternative Transportation Program Manager in the Washington office. And as Eric has said, I'm here to give you an overview of the bill and a little bit on partnerships as well, teeing up the rest of the session here today. The bill was signed last fall in November. It's also called the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. You might hear that label for the legislation. People also call it the EJA. So if you hear EJA, you'll know it's IIJA or something like that. Jen and Bob here also referenced the magnitude of funding. It's generational, it's transformative for transportation, for a number of infrastructure areas. It's over $1 trillion bill that over 5 years, spread out over 5 years, and half of that funding is for transportation. So it's an exciting time to be looking at transportation and needs and improvements across the country. This legislation obviously updates the past transportation legislation that was called the FAST Act, that was signed in December of 2015. So, we're bringing forward all of those great things from the FAST Act and adding quite a bit to it. The Omnibus Appropriations Bill approved last month, or actually in March now, basically set forth all those bill programs and provided the appropriated funding from Department of Transportation to support existing programs, but then also start with the discretionary programs and funding those. And our Department of Transportation partners are starting to roll those out. Opportunities for MPS are pretty simple. Some things we can apply directly for. We had a past webinar on eligibility, or excuse me, on grant opportunities that we are directly eligible for. there's competitive grant programs that are related to partnerships, and that's more about what this webinar is about here today. There's also quite a bit of formula programs that are related to transportation that DOT issues out to states. A lot of that funding is increased as well. And then there's authorized programs. So the NPS program within the Federal Lands Transportation Program, we consider an authorized program. That program is increased in the bill. And that provides a great foundation for us to look at transportation improvements, leverage those dollars going forward. Next slide, please. So there's some common sense reasons why you'd partner, right? Particularly for transportation. We look at transportation as a system. It's a system that connects to and through and within parks. So it's important to always acknowledge that obviously the visiting public coming to parks has to traverse both of those networks. And when you consider that premise, you start to think about we then share common goals and interests, and improving that transportation system is really important for everyone involved. Partnerships obviously can build relationships, can extend beyond just personal to a broader sense of an organization, and I think we've seen that in transportation over the years. With those partnerships and relationships come then discussions about improvements and opportunities for funding. And I think we've done that in the past in transportation, and with the bill here provides great opportunity to expand upon that. And then lastly, we may feel like we know everything about the transportation system connecting to parks, but those partnerships can give us different perspectives, can bring new ideas forward to help us all better plan, construct, and implement improvements for the traveling public to parks. And here, the image here shows that partnerships can be quite fun and exciting. The people here are enjoying signing this MOU between Department of Transportation and Department of the Interior. In fact, our secretaries. Next slide. So partnership opportunities, again, just to reiterate, can relate with a partner to the NPS, actually submitting the grant that benefits the NPS, and there's quite a few programs like that. There's a few programs in the new bill that specifically indicate that the NPS can jointly submit the grant application with a partner, most likely the State Department of Transportation or the state in general. There's many formula programs that are provided to states that I referenced earlier. One, for example, like the Highway Safety Improvement Program is a formula program that goes out to states. That provides opportunities for the NPS to coordinate with that state and think about how those funds could potentially be applied on the entrance roads to parks or even within a park system, if appropriate and applicable. And that would all be handled at the state level. And then lastly, and most importantly, partners provide that opportunity to provide support letters, both from within a state government at all levels, all the way to the governor's office, perhaps. But then also that type of support can and should lead to a discussion of cost sharing or funding opportunities, particularly for matching funds for federal funds. And I think that's where we've been successful in the past, and I think those create huge opportunities in the future. Next slide, please. So we're not going to use this webinar to go into detail on each of these particular partnership grants. And at the end of the webinar, there'll be a slide on referencing resource materials for you all, and certainly can use this webinar here to answer questions. But there are programs where partners can apply for improvements that would benefit the NPS, either directly or indirectly. And there's a list of them here. Some of them are new, some of them are existing from the past transportation legislation. Would like to highlight the two green ones, though, real quick. We can apply, we're directly eligible under the law to apply for, or eligible to receive those funds, excuse me, but we'd have to apply jointly with the state. So there's one called Infrastructure for Rebuilding America program. And then a new program in the bill related to climate resiliency that we're really excited to see how that develops in the new bill rollout coming up from the Department of Transportation. And then lastly, but certainly not least as well, is formula programs, like I mentioned earlier again, but there is an important one on electric vehicle infrastructure supporting charging that has formula with the states, but then we'll also have a discretionary grant program to states. So we're following that very closely as a transportation program and trying to work with partners in states to figure out how to best align the National Park Service for those opportunities. Next slide, please. So lastly for me here is, so you might be thinking, well, that's great. That sound like wonderful opportunities, but how does that align with the National Park Service and our priorities, particularly for transportation? Well, it aligns really well. We're very much focused in our program on protecting the climate and advancing resource protection. And then that involves, obviously electric vehicle trajectory that we're all on, particularly for MPS-owned transit fleets and other services like that. But also for climate change, and many of us are seeing those impacts. How can we better be prepared in a planning world for those items to come, but then also start developing projects and put them in the pipeline for construction and so forth. Secondly, connecting to communities and providing those opportunities for all to better connect to parks and public lands is a really important thing. It's nothing new, but it's certainly a big emphasis in the new bill, and that involves, in our world in transportation, looking at all the modes to provide those opportunities for people to best connect to parks and be able to provide those opportunities continuously and at low cost. And those are important things. And then for me personally, kind of looking at new transportation technologies and how can we best be smart and use that new transportation, emerging mobility initiatives and all those things, the best use we can to make all of those things better. And then last but not least is, making those really big fundamental investments in our bridges, our roads, our tunnels that exist in the United States, in the parks. And it's really important that those maintain a good state of repair, that we're taking care of those investments that are trusted to us as within the National Park Service. So with that, I will now move to introducing Krista Sherwood. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Steve. Hi, everyone. I'm Krista Sherwood with the Conservation and Outdoor Recreation Division in the Washington office, and I manage the National Park Service Office of Outdoor Recreation. And for the next few slides, I'll be sharing strategies for establishing partnerships to pursue these BIL transportation funding opportunities for the programs that Steve discussed on an earlier slide. So partnerships may be necessary for many of these external funding opportunities, but more importantly, it's these partnerships that can help the National Park Service create that integrated and multimodal transportation network that Steve also mentioned earlier. This type of network allows us to create access for a variety of modal preferences and abilities, and also create those connections between our parks and our gateway communities that Bob mentioned. In order to do this effectively, the first step we must take is to work outside of our park boundaries and coordinate with surrounding transportation systems and processes. Whether the project involves a National Park Service managed and owned road or trail that serves as part of a local commuting route, or whether the proposal is to create a brand new or improved connection with the surrounding community, the National Park Service needs to get involved in the state, local, and regional planning process, as well as build partnerships with others such as friends groups, nonprofit organizations, and state, local, or regional governments, and others as well. Next slide, please. So it's important to know that federal transportation funding, this BIL funding, is channeled through state DOTs and regional NPOs to carry out the coordinated transportation planning processes and determine project and funding investments for a state and a region. So the purpose of this planning process is to ensure collaborative and coordinated investments are made, and partnerships can help further align regional goals and leverage resources and expertise in projects while also building political will. For parks to access these funding opportunities, you'll need to align your transportation projects and needs with the priorities of an area, and of course, align with the purpose of that funding program. Partnerships may be necessary for eligibility purposes, except for those programs that were colored in the green box, but it may increase the chances of a project being awarded funding due to its collaborative and leveraging abilities. Now, are you wondering what you need to do next? So now that you know you need to work outside of park boundaries, the next step is to identify which state DOT and MPO or RPO your park is in. So an RPO is a regional planning organization, and MPO is a metropolitan planning organization. If you're in an urban area with a population of 50,000 or more, it's an MPO, Metropolitan Planning Organization. If it's less, it's likely going to be an RPO, a Rural Planning Organization. Most DOTs and MPOs have staff directories on their website, so look for the transportation planner contacts. Now, you'll need to be proactive and contact these planners to introduce yourself and begin the conversation. And I will be honest, in most cases, they may not even be aware that there's a national park in their community. So making this connection is a really great first step. So next, you'll need to get involved and attend the public transportation meetings. Provide input in their process and share the park's transportation challenges and needs. This is your opportunity to incorporate the park's needs into their long-term vision documents and transportation improvement programs for funding investments. So lastly, start identifying other potential partners with related interest in creating connections or providing enhanced visitor or conservation opportunities. This is where project ideas can be developed. Partners could be managers of nearby destinations, campgrounds, or areas of businesses or attractions. They could be transportation or rental providers, or conservation organizations. The options really are unlimited and tailored to your community. Next slide, please. So ultimately, the key takeaway here is that we can accomplish more by working beyond our park boundaries, coordinating with surrounding communities, and building partnerships. If you need assistance in getting involved in the local or regional transportation planning process or identifying partners, reach out to your National Park Service Regional Transportation Program Manager. I think the contact information will be later on this slide, or contact your partnership coordinator. And there are also community assistance programs like the National Park Service Rivers, Trails, and Conservation Assistance Program, who can also assist with these efforts. So here on the slide, I've listed a few additional resources here that might be useful. The first one is the Brian O'Neill Partnership Success Factors. It is a synthesis of successful partnership elements from a former superintendent at Golden Gate National Park, which earned a reputation as a model partnership park. The next is the National Park Service Active Transportation Guidebook, which is a great resource for parks and partners in pursuing bike and pedestrian opportunities. It includes a chapter on partnerships and funding with strategies for creating connections, partnership examples, types of agreements, and more. And then lastly is the directory of NPS assistance, community assistance programs, which lists the technical assistance programs in the Park Service, like the RTCA program, that can provide expertise and support in partnership efforts. So thank you for your time. And next I'll pass the presentation over to Erica, who will provide more information on the importance of an integrated planning process.
Great. Yeah, thank you, Krista. And yeah, just as Krista was discussing, involvement in state DOT and other regional or metropolitan transportation planning processes is critical in establishing partnerships. Last December, a joint memo from the National Park Service and Federal Lands Highway was issued that communicated the importance of multi-agency coordination. Now, integrated transportation planning is formalizing a lot of what Krista was describing on the previous slide. This is an enterprise activity for the Federal Highway Administration. That means that this type of coordination with federal lands is actually in these agencies' performance objectives. So parks and regions may receive more frequent invites to participate in these local transportation planning meetings. We encourage you to engage in those processes because this will help fulfill this vision here for integrated transportation planning of open communication and coordination among agencies in support of a continuing cooperative and comprehensive transportation planning process that us in the transportation world call the 3C process. There are four main goals here set out for integrated transportation planning: partner engagement, system preservation, safety, and economic generation. I do want to mention, while economic generation may not be a focus of the NPS mission, but it is important to a lot of these bill opportunities, and is also a Title 23 appropriations planning factor, which also includes travel and tourism. So we may need to really be thinking, a little bit outside of the NPS box and use some of the resources, especially thinking about the visitor spending effects information that we have from the social science program. Now, there was an integrated transportation planning pilot held in Colorado around 2019-2020. This was done in advance of that memo to really explore, is this a beneficial process for parks to be engaging in? And so 7 national parks in Colorado participated in these meetings across the states, where meetings were held with local federal land managers, transportation planning representatives, along with regional and state representatives from these federal land management agencies and Colorado's Department of Transportation. At these meetings, access needs were collaboratively developed with all attendees, and then they were actually documented into the Regional Transportation's appendix. The next step is actually to look at these needs and further develop them and integrate them into different funding programs, including like the statewide transportation improvement plan, or even new opportunities through the bipartisan infrastructure law. And here you can see on the slide a map of the state of Colorado, kind of indicating where some of the major travel corridors are and the parks that participated in these meetings. Just to further expand on the pilot there, so in the San Luis Valley, there was this meeting held, and here you can see on the screen the cover of the Regional Transportation Plan. And in that appendix, those multi-agency needs are identified. And you can actually see here on the screen where there are different access needs identified for the local Fish and Wildlife, Bureau of Land Management, Forest Service, Bureau of Reclamation, and of course some needs here for Great Sand Dunes National Park. And also you can see here that there are multiple different types of ownerships of these different facilities. And this potentially indicates the need to partner to further develop the need, and then work with these partners to seek funding and potentially look for bill opportunities for that. And with that, I want to hand it over to David now to further talk about some of the success stories and lessons learned from other regions across the service. David?
Thanks, Erica. Can everyone hear me? So yeah, I think, Erica had asked me to present because the National Capital Region has a lot of history and experience with grants. We're sort of like a natural test bed, given that all of our parks are sort of overlapping with local state DOT and county infrastructure. So, in the past 5 years, we've leveraged working with our parks about $180 million in grants, and that success has been grounded in basically a regional approach or a regional strategy to identify and sort of prioritize and provide direct technical assistance to basically projects that we know would be competitive for these programs. I think it's important, though, when you're talking about partnerships, it's not always just about money and grants. It's also about leveraging technical expertise of our partners and also their ability and capacity to maintain and operate infrastructure and systems. So a couple examples would be partnering with a local transit agency who can more efficiently and more effectively run a transit system than we can. Another example is, the District Department of Transportation has a lot of expertise in designing bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure, expertise that we don't have in-house and that our partners at Federal Highway don't have. So I wanted to highlight 3 kind of, I think, diverse examples from some of the successful partnerships. The first, which I kind of alluded to, is in Harper's Ferry. We're working with the local transit agency to apply for a FLAP grant to replace a Park Service-owned transit fleet with what will become a transit agency-owned fleet. And so the idea there is that since we only need that fleet about 6 months out of the year for the peak season, that the transit agency can own that fleet and then use that fleet in the off-season on their routes that serve the greater region surrounding the park. And so it's a great chance for us to bring this grant opportunity to them, one that they wouldn't be eligible without our support and wouldn't be aware of, and sort of help them secure those funds in partnership. And I know other parks are doing similar things throughout the country. Another example I want to highlight was it's not always about one grant. Sometimes it's about thinking across the sort of expanse of this legislation or past legislation. So C&O Canal has been very, very successful partnering with the Maryland Department of Transportation on getting annually $1 to $2 million for Transportation Alternatives program. And they've been doing this for probably 10 or 15 years. And so, $1 or $2 million a year over 10 or 15 years, they can kind of do the math. It's a lot of money. It really helps the parks supplement their cyclic and other funding that they usually use. And they're able to use those grants to invest in historic transportation assets throughout, their 185-mile park. So a really great program and partnership that sort of spans across multiple years, and the park has been shown to be an effective partner in delivering these projects and obligating the funds, which the agencies that are responsible for these funds, that's one of their highest priorities is to spend, not only get the money, but to expend the money. Last one I wanted to highlight, and I know this has been a big focus at WASA recently, is the National Scenic Trails. Oftentimes they do cross through parks, but oftentimes they are owned and maintained by our partners, and so those trails are great places for FLAP grants and these other BIL grants because they sort of are a natural fit, has that national designation, but it's not something that we own, right? So in NCR, we've been very successful with the Potomac Heritage National Scenic Trail in closing gaps and studying feasibility of closing gaps with county park agencies in Prince William County and elsewhere in Northern Virginia. So that's been a great ongoing partnership using the FLAP program. Next slide. Wanted to highlight a recent example. This is a bigger example. And so in partnership with the Prince George's County Department of Parks and Recreation and Montgomery Parks, and then also the District Department of Transportation, we recently submitted for a RAISE grant to support the construction of approximately 15 miles of trail rehab and new trail construction. And Erica, next slide, please. This is a $75 million project. The grant request was $25 million. And it's sort of basically we took a bunch of different projects and packaged them together as kind of one branded project, but they're all discrete projects. And two of them are on Park Service land, but ultimately the trails that would be funded would be owned and maintained by our partners. And so it was a kind of a great chance to collaborate across the region, 3 partners, and really, I think, advance, the sum is greater than each individual part. And I think a really compelling grant. I will say, we thought it was compelling last year, we lost. And so we kind of repackaged, re-strategized, and resubmitted again. And so we're optimistic about our chances for this ongoing review that's happening right now. Next slide, please, Erica. These are some general lessons learned from the past 5 years, kind of silly ways of framing some of my thoughts, but I thought kind of try to make it fun for everyone. I think it's important, like you don't want to wait until the grant call comes out to start planning. You're too late, right? If the grant call comes out, you're way too late to start engaging partners and start thinking about what you want to fund. So you really want to know what you're going to fund before you start trying to write a grant. You don't want to don't plan by grant. Another thing to think about is that grants can help expedite and catalyze decisions. Sometimes we're a little slow in the Park Service. Sometimes we drag our feet, or we have a compliance problem or a sort of legal problem, and grants can really clarify the mind and force us to the table to solve longstanding problems. So example I can think of locally is, we had done a FLAP grant with several parks to place capital bike share stations, particularly in GW Parkway. And the grant development process with our partners in Arlington really helped clarify, authorities and sort of legal challenges around placing, basically non-park surface infrastructure on our land. One thing I like to remind myself when I go and ask partners for things is to think about that request from their perspective. So if you're asking for money or their time, you want to think about, is what you're asking for also a priority for them, or how big of a priority is it for them, and sort of and that helps you kind of think about how and what you're going to ask for before you ask it. Seems obvious, but sometimes it's easy to forget since we're kind of in our own Park Service world. I like to think of when you're doing these grants, it's not you're not coming with your hand out asking for money. You're kind of coming with your hand up, wanting to help. And so that means that we're bringing our money, we're bringing our match money, our expertise in developing these grants, our partners that know how to develop these grants and have successfully won these grants for 5 or 10 years. And so oftentimes, we're bringing more funding to match and more expertise to the table than the partners themselves have. And so we're there to help. We're not there to ask for free things from them. I think this is easy to lose sight of this, especially if you're a planner like I am. It's very easy, frankly, to get money. It's very easy to win grants. Some of these grants are not complex. You could probably write them in about 2 hours, but you could spend 2 or 3 years trying to get the money across books and get compliance complete and get a construction contract underway. And so really got to think a couple steps ahead. As you don't want to get a grant for a project that you're not going to be able to deliver in 3 or 4 years, or that you'll be in the next job and someone else will be struggling to spend it. So you see this a lot where these grants can linger. They can be difficult to spend the money, and you just really want to be sensitive to the kind of the time scale that it takes to get this money. So one thing to think about with this that's important is it's not worth oftentimes going after $100,000, $200,000, because you could spend $100,000 of time trying to get that money to your project. So I mean, it's really oftentimes you want to, it takes as much time to move, $10 million as it does $100,000. And you got to be really careful about, the level of effort it takes once you win that grant. I think the last, maybe most important thing is if you don't ask for it, you won't get it. And so, go big or go home. That's kind of how you have to go with these things. Nobody's going to come to you, to your park and give you free money usually. So the infrastructure world is typically not a world where people want to donate money to. People don't want to donate money to bridges. They don't want to donate money typically for transit operations. And really all of these things are funded typically by, legislation like BIL. And that's I think why we're here today is, we want to take advantage of all the various opportunities that this legislation provides us. I think there's a lot of goodies in there for us if we're smart about how we pursue the money. But that's all I have. Thank you, Erica.
Thank you, David, and thank you to the rest of our guest speakers for today. So I did want to let you all know about some of the resources that are available. A bipartisan infrastructure law transportation work group recently kicked off with representatives from across NPS programs. This group is developing a strategic implementation plan along with resources to assist parks and regions. I am the lead of this work group, so if you all have any additional questions, and if I don't know the answer to those questions, I will help you figure out the answer to those questions. So please feel free to reach out. We did have a slide earlier where I talked about integrated transportation planning. This is an area that the NPS's transportation planning program provides support on. So if you would like to further discuss that topic, please contact Joe Regula. And of course, there are other transportation program contacts available and your regional transportation coordinators too. So those people are available also to assist. Then we have developed a BIL Hub SharePoint site, and on there you can find a memo from Mike Caldwell explaining a little bit more about the bill and also some just information about where we went to the regions to get potential projects. Then there is also this BIL programs matrix. While we didn't go into a lot of detail on some of the individual programs today, there is this BIL programs matrix that will help you navigate some of these fund sources. And then there is, as notice of funding opportunities are released, you will also find those on this site. And today's webinar, along with the previous webinar that was held to introduce the bipartisan infrastructure law, those recordings will also be found on the site. And of course, as the transportation work group on BIL starts building out some of those resources, we will also make those available. And with that, I would like to open it up for question and answer. And Amy from the Volpe Center is going to help moderate the question and answer session. So I did want to just kind of ask Amy now if there are any questions in the chat that we need to address.
Yeah, there's a couple questions that have come in the chat so far. Folks should feel free to continue to put questions in the chat, or if you want to ask a question yourself, you can raise your hand in Teams. But we'll start with the questions in the chat. There are a couple logistical questions about whether the slide deck and webinar recording will be available to share. And Joni has noted in the chat that both of these will be available on the BIL Hub site. And then there were also some questions about whether the recording will be available for partners to access. And there were some comments in the chat as well about putting that on the NPS transportation website, as well as linking to it from the partnerships toolkit. So the answer is yes, we'll make these resources available. And the link to that BIL Hub site is in the chat now as well, if anyone wants to look at that now. And then we also got a more specific question. This looks like it's a question for Steve, at least to start, although others may want to weigh in. And this is a question from Keena Graham, the superintendent of the Medgar and Merle Evers Home Evers Home National Monument in Jackson, Mississippi. And Keena says, I'm working on 2 transportation-related projects. The first one is a shuttle tour of Medgar and Merle Evers related sites in Jackson and in the Mississippi Delta. I'd like to use green vehicles for this. I would be partnering with the city and the Mississippi Delta National Heritage Area. The second project is the I-20 Civil Rights Sites project. I'm working with Superintendent Chris Butcher in Alabama, as well as other civil rights sites along I-20 in Alabama and Mississippi. Again, we'd like to use green transportation. Would these projects qualify for funds? So Steve or others, any thoughts about this question?
Yeah, thanks, Amy. I can get started and others can join in on the team here. So, you know, if you're talking about a new shuttle service of some sort to park sites, if you will, you know, there's several things to consider, and we can certainly follow up with you in detail or through the regional office here from the Washington office. No problem there. You know, you want to think about what is the service plan for such of connections and such, and it's, you know, good service planning up front and looking at the needs and connection is really important. But then also, obviously, thinking about the capital improvements, who's going to own and maintain vehicles for such service, and then how is the service costs to actually operate it going to be handled? You know, depending on how a new system like that is considered or how it fits into with municipal transit systems that already exist, you know, could be leveraging of different formula grant programs that come out of the Federal Transit Administration to support that. Could be a great opportunity for a partnership with the National Park Service, the local municipal transit authority, perhaps even the state and other partners as well, to help solve that issue. But I can't emphasize enough sort of the service planning idea, you know, getting that really solid and sort of evaluated. And in fact, there are funds, I think, out there for planning related items as well. So I'll stop there and see if Joni or Erica would like to add to that. Maybe Erica.
Yeah, as I was kind of reading through the particular question there too, I was definitely thinking of a few different programs, whether it is the RAISE program or transportation alternatives. I think it's, you know, in order to really figure out some of these, I think we really probably do need to have a more detailed conversation with the park staff and then also the region too, to make sure we're all on the same page. So if you would like to send me a follow-up email, we can definitely schedule a time to discuss further. But yeah, wanted to see if Joni had anything else to add.
Would flat be an appropriate fund source? I sent David, aren't you weren't you considering FLAP for Harper's Ferry?
Yeah, it depends, Jenny, on the kind of what part of this service you want to fund. But yeah, if it's like you're buying vehicles and there's a partner, then FLAP would be good. I think there's a couple different ways depending on, like Erica said, I think the business model and kind of what exactly the park was looking at.
But I think just to summarize, I think, mentioning green vehicles or green transportation, electric vehicles, however you want to define that, there should be plenty of opportunities there, frankly, going forward. The question is how to solve that and how to look at the different options that you might have. And then, part of that involves communication and connection. And, it's not clear to me whether you're talking about a tour that would go between sites. Perhaps that's what this implies. Anyway, it doesn't matter. You're looking for a service type arrangement of some sort that can provide visitors options to move around.
Thank you.
So there's another question in the chat from Christopher Finlay. Can you describe the timing associated with availability of matching funds when a grant application is submitted? Do the matching funds need to be available upfront, or can they be provided later on in the planning, design, construction, solicitation process? So I think this could be for any of our speakers. Maybe David could speak to how his experience has worked in the National Capital Region, or anyone else who wants to chime in on this one.
It's a tricky question. There's also an issue too where you spend money before like the grant was submitted, and you can't use that as a match. But usually, Chris, it's at the time of obligation you have to meet the match requirements. So let's say you execute the base contract and it's an 80-20 match, then 80% of that base contract award would be the grant, and 20% would be, line item or GOA or FLIP or partner funds. So you kind of have to meet that match commitment for every option or schedule in the contract, and it has to be after kind of grant award. So like you receive the grant, or you get awarded the grant, then you receive, then they send you the money, and then you expend the money, and it's at that time of it when you expend it or obligate it that you have to meet the match requirements.
Got it. Thank you. Thanks, David.
Great. Amy, is that all the questions in the chat?
Actually, one just came in right now. Are there other parks that are applying for scenic byways grants? So this is not a grant that we talked about as part of this webinar. I don't know if any of the speakers want to talk about scenic byways grants right now, or if we should follow up on that afterwards.
Yeah. I think that is something we should follow up on back with, I think it looks like Susan here had that question. And just to let you all know, our Scenic Byways program manager was actually at the Scenic Byways conference this week on a panel presentation on this. I have heard a few information pieces from her about parks applying for Scenic Byways grants, but I definitely want to check with her to make sure that we get the right information out there. And Susan, the Scenic Byways program manager, her name is Jennifer Miller. I'll put her name in her email into the chat here because she does have an initial into her email address. And that way, if you have further questions on Scenic Byways, you can definitely reach out to her.
And that's all the questions we have in the chat for now.
Does anybody want to come on and ask a question here? Yes, see Ben West, I think you have your hand up here.
So I hesitate to even ask because I'm not sure, but Erica, you don't have to go back to the slide, but you had this slide about the big sort of mega project in Colorado, and you had a bunch of rows of different types of projects for different agencies in that sort of long-range transportation plan, or in the TIP, I guess, for that particular area. I guess maybe my question, which is like, how important is it for the parks to get projects like this in these regional transportation plans that are part of a larger MPO proposal or something like that. Does that make sense? I guess what I'm getting at is, we're used to doing like a Park Service plan, or either a one for the agency as a whole, or for the region. We've done these regional transportation plans, but projects that are sort of included in the MPO's plan itself. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. And so these integrated transportation planning concepts, especially at a statewide level, are relatively new. While I definitely would encourage everybody here to participate, if anybody is asked to participate in regional transportation planning meetings, I wouldn't say that this is something that has to be done in order to be eligible for a bipartisan infrastructure law funding. But the important part of, what you kind of see as an outcome here was the parks and the other federal land managers in that area getting together, discussing that they have a shared vision for access in that area, and then moving forward with some types of common needs in that. And now, while, it happened more formally through this process here in Colorado, it could also happen more informally. It's more important about, that getting to know your partner and having that shared vision for the future, and being on the same page about those common access needs. And while we do have it's interesting because a lot of the other federal lands, they have different types of, access needs than the national parks. So you'll see on some of these, it's actually projects within the other federal lands boundaries, whereas when it's a park, we were thinking more of those external connections, things that would be eligible under that federal lands access program. So with that integrated transportation planning initiative, it is on the states now to be reaching out and to including us FLMAs into their processes. So, we want to be responsive when they do ask to kind of, further that relationship building and development. So just to kind of summarize, I wouldn't say it's a have to do, what we did here in Colorado, but there is benefits.
So you nailed it, right? I didn't ask what I should have led with. I buried the lead, right? Does it need to be in that plan in order to get access to the money? And it sounds like it doesn't, but there are benefits. Everything you said, I totally agree with. So
yes, exactly. So, and it would be, a goal long term for other states to, have some more inclusive processes. And that's why we here at the Washington level are working with our partners over at Federal Lands Highway to have them encourage state DOTs to include us in their processes more, because it's a two-way relationship for sure. Let's see. And Amy, are there any other questions here in the chat?
There was one more that came in from Jennifer McMahon. And this could be a question for Erica or Steve to start, I think. And it's about training. So might there be some trainings available in the future to help parks better understand the funding programs? And more importantly, if funding is awarded, what are the rules around how the money moves and what documentation is needed in order for money to move between and among federal, state, and nonprofit entities? And then referencing David's comment about how getting money is easy, spending is a little trickier.
Yes. And so, Jennifer, the work group right now, the BIL work group I referenced, we are in the process of developing these resources. So it's an excellent idea that you have posed here in the chat. And I think that is something the work group can take and start recognizing as a need to really support parks and regions as they really need to, understand more about how this really all works together and how the pieces kind of fit, and especially getting to, spending that money. So I'll add this as a suggestion for the work group to further develop. So yes, thank you for that suggestion so much.
And that's it for questions in the chat.
Okay. I did want to just ask one more time to the audience here if anybody else would like to, unmute and come on screen and ask a few questions. Okay.
Hello?
Hello, yes.
Hi, yes, I'm Debbie Wren from the IR2 Southeast Regional Office. I'm just curious, this integrated transportation planning Colorado example. is there a place that would identify all the states that have this type of program planning going on already for the parks in our region, for example?
So we could actually ask Federal Lands Highway, that's our transportation partner, and to see if they could, inquire with, the state DOTs on their side to see if they do have a list of people that are states that are engaging in this. I do know because it is an enterprise activity for Federal Highway Administration, which tiers down to the state DOTs, that they should all be looking to integrate the federal lands into their process, but I don't have those exact details right now. But if you do have any specific states you're interested in, feel free to send me and also Joe Regula an email. Also, please be sure to include your regional transportation coordinator to make sure that they're also included in these conversations too. So, but yeah, definitely happy to look into this more.
Thank you.
Give it a few more seconds here to see if there's any other questions before we adjourn. All right, I'm not hearing any further questions, but as I was saying earlier, feel free to reach out to me and I can help navigate and help answer some questions as we move through the bipartisan infrastructure law implementation process here at the NPS. So thank you all for your time and have a good rest of your day. Thank you.